In a small coastal town where the sea mist settled heavily on winter mornings, Lydia and Arthur had lived in the same weathered clapboard house for over 20 years. From the outside, their home seemed idyllic, a cozy place surrounded by wild rose bushes and overlooking the foggy, endless sea. But inside, the silence was thick and seemed to seep into every corner of their life together. In their early years, Lydia and Arthur had been inseparable, so in love that friends and family joked they could read each other's minds. But as the years wore on, something imperceptible began to settle between them. Arthur grew quiet, almost withdrawn, as if the words he'd once shared with her had turned to stone. When she asked him about his thoughts or the growing space between them, he would brush it off with a shrug and a tired smile.
Nothing's wrong. Work's just been busy, that's all.
He'd say, almost too quickly. But Lydia knew it was more than that. She felt it in the little things, the way he no longer looked her in the eye, or how his touch was as fleeting as the mist outside their window. She missed the man who used to reach for her hand, who filled their home with laughter and stories about his day. Now, Arthur avoided any conversation that lingered on discomfort, on anything that might hint at what lay beneath the surface. To keep the peace, Lydia began pretending. She wore a mask of contentment, laughed at his sparse jokes, and went along with their quiet routines. She carried out her duties as a wife, making dinners, tending to the garden, and maintaining the facade of a happy home. But each night, as she lay beside him in bed, staring at the ceiling, a hollow ache gnawed at her heart. She was slowly becoming a stranger to herself. Lydia tried to confide in her closest friend, Margaret, hoping for some advice or comfort. But even there, she found herself downplaying her emotions, speaking only of trivial grievances and laughing them off, as if to trivialize the growing void between her and Arthur. One cold autumn morning, while Arthur was out running errands, Lydia ventured into the attic to sort through boxes. She found a dusty, forgotten photo album from their early days together. As she flipped through the pages, the vibrant photos seemed like scenes from another life, a life that belonged to two strangers who had loved with abandon, who couldn't have known how silence would creep between them like frost in November. That night, with the photo album still in her mind, she found herself lying awake, the silence between them heavier than usual. She turned to Arthur in the dark, her heart pounding.
Arthur, are you happy?
She whispered, barely audible. In the dim light, she saw him shift uncomfortably, his face shadowed but unreadable.
Lydia, let's not go down this road.
He replied, his voice tight.
You know how I feel about bringing up unnecessary problems.
Unnecessary? Do you realize I've been living with this silence for years? Trying to pretend everything is fine while I'm dying inside?
Arthur sat up, startled, his expression a mix of confusion and something close to anger.
Why bring this up now, Lydia? Can't we just let things be?
Her frustration spilled over. She threw off the covers, her hands clenched into fists.
No, Arthur, I can't just let things be. I don't know who we are anymore. I'm just a ghost in this house, pretending we still have something worth holding on to.
She turned away, fighting back tears, but Arthur grabbed her arm. For a moment, his grip was tight, almost desperate. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then faltered, his face a storm of unspoken words. But when he finally spoke, all he could manage was,
I didn't know that it was this bad.
The words hung between them, fragile and uncertain. Lydia looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears.
If you'd ever listened, you would have known.
In that moment, they both stood on the edge of something they couldn't ignore, their silence broken but leaving a gaping chasm in its wake. She pulled her arm free, and without another word, slipped into the living room. She wrapped herself in a blanket and sat by the window, watching as the fog rolled in, swallowing the landscape outside. It seemed almost fitting, she thought, that the mist would be there to cover the world outside, just as the silence had always veiled the life they'd shared. And as the first light of dawn crept into the room, Lydia knew that whether Arthur joined her or not, she had stepped into a new truth, a truth that would either bring them closer or leave her, finally, alone.
The story teaches us that in marriage, silence can be as damaging as anger, slowly eroding the bond that once held two people together. Communication, especially about uncomfortable or painful topics, is essential for maintaining closeness and understanding. When one partner avoids these conversations, it can lead to resentment and emotional distance, making even shared spaces feel isolating. True intimacy requires vulnerability, honesty, and the willingness to address challenges together. Ignoring issues for the sake of peace may seem easier in the short term, but over time, it can turn even a loving marriage into a quiet, lonely partnership. The lesson here is that facing discomfort with courage and openness allows love to grow, while avoidance only fosters a cold and empty silence.